Yo, Philly, how you's doing? Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball, past, present, and personal, brought to you by the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Bill Kashatus, your host for the podcast. Each week we explore Philadelphia's rich baseball history with a special guest. He may be a former major or minor league player, baseball historian, beat writer, or some other personality associated with the city's baseball past. This week, I'm pleased to have as my guest Dick Perez, who was the official artist of the National Baseball Hall of Fame for over 20 years, and where many of his paintings still hang. Dick is also the official artist of the Philadelphia Phillies. Since 1972, he has created yearbooks, posters, prints, and has designed a variety of sales and promotional literature for the team. Baseball card collectors will also recognize Perez's artwork from the popular Donruss Diamond King series in the 1980s and 90s. Dick is currently creating paintings for art cards published by the Topps Card Company. Welcome to the podcast, Dick.
Real pleasure to be here with you and having a conversation. I always loved having conversations with you, Bill.
Thank you. Dick, is a baseball historian, and we know that artists can be historians too, but I'm often asked how I began writing about the sport, and I always say, look, if you truly love baseball, you'll find a way to channel that passion into a career, though not necessarily as a player. Now, in your case, growing up in New York City during the 1950s and early 60s, in many ways that was the golden era of New York baseball. And I'd imagine that the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Giants served as your inspiration to become, a baseball fan. Well, what was your inspiration to become a baseball artist or a sports artist?
Yeah, well, it was long after that. What coming to this country from Puerto Rico, same country, but coming to the mainland, let's say, from Puerto Rico at 6 years old, what you wanted to do was you wanted to assimilate. You wanted to be, and baseball was there for me in the city and among friends, and it was sort of my gateway to the American experience, as I've always said. So that was my passion for baseball was there. That's where I got it. But as far as, and I also like to draw, but I never tied the two things together. And I drew in school. I would draw margins of my notebooks. I would draw airplanes and baseball players. But I never really had that thought that the outcome would be that I would become a sports artist. What inspired me to pursue it, and I'll backtrack a little bit, I knew that I wanted to do something with my hands, some graphic, some art thing. And for me, the sure way of making a living at it was to become a graphic designer, because that way you can be employed by agencies or art studios, etc. So that was my main goal, was to become a graphic designer, to design publications, ads, and what have you, and perhaps maybe get a little bit into illustration, because that's a big dream, but that's a real risk that you run, because most illustrators are freelance and you have to be discovered and so forth. So I got my desire, went to art school and became a graphic designer, and I started working with the Eagles. That's a lot of background to that. But I worked with the Eagles, and working with them, I started to look at all the wonderful artwork that NFL Properties was producing. Illustrators of great renown, people like Bart Forbes, maybe don't mean much to a lot of people, but Bart Forbes, Merv Corning, Chuck Wren, Bernie Fuchs, they were wonderful illustrators. And aside from photographs that NFL Properties use in their programs and stuff, they also use these illustrators. And that just inspired me to say, wow, what a way to make a living. And I started to incorporate in my design work, instead of outsourcing the illustration work, I started doing that myself. Now, when I went to art school, I did have some painting courses and some drawing courses, but they weren't concentrated on becoming a fine art painter or, someone or an illustrator. So basically that's how I became inspired. And then one thing led to another, and I became affiliated with the Phillies and the Hall of Fame, and it just sort of blossomed because I started to do so much work that you got better at it. And I did get better at it. So that, inspiration was really football.
Mm-hmm. Now,
although baseball is really that's really where it pays off. There's a big collector population out there for baseball, and I'm sure that football is starting to get theirs, but because baseball goes back so long, in the middle of the 19th century, there's a greater history, and there's more memorabilia to collect and more memories. So that's it.
I'm glad you mentioned that your initial foray into the sports art was through the Eagles, but I want to kind of take a step back here because you went to the University of Pennsylvania. You also went to the Philadelphia College of Art, and that means that you are trained in the discipline of art. You are an artist, period. I mean, now you work in different genres, but we also know you do landscape. So, you are an artist, not just a sports artist. And one of the things in our conversations that I've been so impressed with is your knowledge of John Singer Sargent and Thomas Eakins. Of course, Eakins did, I guess, one of the earliest baseball paintings, but, you really are an astute student of art in different styles. So first and foremost, you're an artist. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I'm an artist, and I expand on that term in that what an artist has to do is bring to, and it's not just copying what's in front of you as accurately as possible. One of the big things in an accomplished artist's life is that they wish they could paint like they used to when they were a child. It was more exploratory, more creative. Once you learn how to mix skin tones, how to do shadows and total values and transitions and all that, all of a sudden you had a parameters to work within. You weren't as free as, you can. Obviously, a lot of people went straight from that. The impressionists, the abstract impressionists, all these, they strayed from that to try to capture that creativity that they had when they were a child, when they were not worried about the accuracy of something, but about the expression on how something moved you, or how something inspired you to record. So yes, that I put myself in that classification.
And yet your work really is extremely creative, because you do your homework. I mean, as we say, artist as historian, you're right there. I mean, you are a student of history as well. So when we look at, let's say, a painting that you have done of Richie Ashburn standing on deck and swinging the bat, you've got that Shibe Park background there to a T, the advertisements, the color of his uniform, his musculature, the way he would have swung that bat on the on-deck center. I mean, you really are a student of history then, and the creativity in that work is extremely impressive. And,
right.
I get the question there is, how do you go about that process? Because painting is a process, it's not just sitting down with the paints, it's doing the research too.
Right. And one of the motivators for that is that I've done it many times because that's what's required, but I don't like just taking a photograph, and then transforming it into a painting. I like to create narratives with my work, so that there are many. I mean, in the book The Immortals that I've done, a lot of the paintings there are, each painting might have sources from 4 or 5 different photos. I would take signage from one picture, and maybe the head of the player I want, and then the body maybe because I like the swing better from somewhere else, and I just compose my image according to my own desires. And what I've tried to do with my paintings is to chronicle the game visually. Changes of uniform, changes of stadium, changes of players that have older looking faces than they. I mean, when I painted Grover Cleveland Alexander, I couldn't believe a player that old can be playing, and it wasn't. He was still a young person. I mean, there was a certain cragginess, I think, to a lot of those ball players of the past. And of course uniforms and equipment and all that stuff. All that has to be coordinated so that you're using the right elements that they're all from the same time period. So there is that kind of research that you have to do. And quite frankly, that is probably among my favorite things to do. I love discovering images that I've never seen before of a player that I'm familiar with but never seen an image like that before. And sometimes you just want to paint that image, but I try to avoid that as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm glad you mentioned the Immortals. Listeners who are not aware of this book, it's a coffee table book, which is really a portfolio of all Dick's paintings that he has done for the National Baseball Hall of Fame. It's all color plate. Shameless plug here. Subtitle: A Celebration of Baseball's Best. If you have not seen this book, it is a phenomenal history book done through art, and really it's a celebration of baseball's past. Dick, how did the idea of that book come about?
Well, it came about because I had done so many paintings for the Hall of Fame, and I felt, baseball goes back to the mid-19th century. And a lot of things happen in this country and in baseball, and it'd be nice to chronicle that visually in a book form, so that you would do players from the 1800s, and you can see the changes of uniform as you went along, and see the and all under the done with portraying Hall of Famers. Every Hall of Famer was placed in this book so that you covered all the eras and the vast history that baseball has. So that was the idea, was to make a visual history of the game. And of course there's writing in there too, Bill, as you know. And so it's not just good to look at, but it's also good to read, because it informs you and it informs the viewer at what they are looking. So that was it. That was my intent, was to have to do a history book, but with paint and brushes.
Mm-hmm. Now, the original book, which by the way can be purchased at dickperez.com, also available on Amazon. The original book was leather bound. But now the book is out in paper, and I understand this is a fairly recent development that Kindle is selling separate eras of the book. They've broken up the book, and you could purchase, a Kindle edition of just one era. Is that correct?
You can, yes, you can. That's not what I intended, but I think that was the way they wanted to do it, so that's how it came out. But right. Maybe it's a blessing. Maybe some people are just interested in a certain era. Like I'm a big dead ball era fan, so I could see I get books just on that, and so it's available, or you can get it whole at a very moderate, the paperback version of the Immortals. It's the same book, but it's a lot more affordable now, because there are a lot of collectors. The number of collectors are so vast that they're not all people who have discretionary income, And I keep that in mind every time I do something or sell a painting or what have you.
Mm-hmm. It is a wonderful contribution to the game, and I know many of us who have copies of it really do appreciate it, and that includes many of the Hall of Famers who are in it. You were the official artist of the National Baseball Hall of Fame for 20-some years. How did that association begin?
Well, I would have to backtrack a little bit in the fact that I met a gentleman by the name of Frank Steele, who was I got to meet through Jim Murray, who was the general manager of the Philadelphia Eagles at the time and is a very good friend of mine. This gentleman, Frank Steele, and Pete Retzlaff, who had retired from football and no longer general manager of the Eagles, he got a license to do large NFL coloring books, and they needed somebody to write them and to illustrate them. And Jim Murray suggested me, and I met Frank Steele that way. The project really didn't go anywhere, but I did gain a very strong friend. I made a strong friendship with Frank because he was a collector of baseball memorabilia. He was a fanatic fan of Pittsburgh Steelers. He was from Pittsburgh, and he had a Wall Street chair at one time, and he was very friendly with Ed Stack, who was the president of the Baseball Hall of Fame. So Frank and I felt we should be able to do something together, and it's a long story, but we eventually created a set of art cards that depicted every Hall of Famer up to the point that we did that in 1980 or so. And it was something new and different because the Hall of Fame didn't have a consistent set of colorful images in card form of their inductees. So what they had was what they call a plaque card, which is a brown picture of a plaque on a yellow background, and it had the actual plaque. That was the extent of it. So it was a great idea at the time. So anyway, we moved forward. So the Hall of Fame got very excited about it, and beyond that, Frank negotiated deals with the card companies because by that time we were doing work for the Don Russ Company, which is a card company, and it was just a lot of stuff that we were bringing in there, obviously, and stuff in terms of royalties and what have you. And Frank suggested that I should be, official, and they bought that. So what that meant was that I designed their yearbooks, and whenever a painting was needed for a special occasion, such as I think there were two presidents who have in their libraries. One was Ronald Reagan and the other was Bill Clinton. When they wanted to present, they had a luncheon they would have an annual luncheon at the White House, and they wanted something to give to the president. I came along, and there was a painting done. So those kind of things. That's what created it, and it was great to have on on my resume. So, but that's all things. Those things, it eventually ended. Frank died in 2001. The landscape of producing work for the Hall of Fame had changed in that when we first started painting these players and selling art postcards, the beneficiary was the Hall of Fame, not the players. They signed off on that to help the institution and maintain it in great quality and what have you. So that started to get more and more difficult to do with agents coming into the picture, so that we would never be able to do the same thing that we did then today. It's just impossible. So that particular project with the Hall of Fame ended in 2001. But that's the long and short of it. It was just a question of my being at the right place at the right time, enough stuff being done that benefited the Hall of Fame greatly. And for a while, I was the official artist there.
You're a very humble gentleman, Dick. you marginalized your talent, and in the 1980s and 90s, during the heights of the sports memorabilia and particularly baseball memorabilia craze, your name and your work became synonymous with the artwork of the national pastime. And I think the Hall of Fame acknowledged that by creating a Perez steel gallery at Cooperstown, and that obviously gave you cachet, but you gave, I think, much warranted exposure to your work. Now, the other thing that, and you touched on this a bit, and I'd like to go a little deeper into it, was your relationship with Donruss, the Donruss baseball card company, the popular Diamond King series. And you do still to this day continue your relationship with these card companies because you have an ongoing project now with Topps. So how did you get involved with the baseball card companies?
Well, as you know, Topps had a monopoly on the production of cards, baseball cards. They had it because they signed these players when they were still in the minor leagues for pittance, $5, $10, $25 to sign a contract to be the image, on their cards for the rest of their careers. Companies like Phillies thought that wasn't, it was a monopoly, and they wanted to, they sued to open that whole world up to other companies that produced bubblegum, because Topps wasn't the only one that was doing cards and gum. And it was a long process, legal process, but eventually it opened up. Fleers, obviously, and then there was a company that was owned by Nestle called Donruss. They did golf cards and celebrity cards and hee-haw cards and all kinds of cards that were not baseball. But now here they were. It's Monday morning, and now they can do baseball cards. How do we separate ourselves from the rest of the other card companies? Well, they had a writer to write the backs of their cards, and his name is Bill Madden. Bill Madden was a sports writer and he's in the Hall of Fame on the writers' wing. He was a baseball writer primarily, and he was writing the backs, and he had a conversation and he knew me and he knew Frank Steele, and he said, you ought to talk to these two guys about, because you're looking for ways to separate yourself, but you should talk to these two guys. And that's Bill Madden speaking with the powers that be at Donruss. And they did. They contacted us. And the reason that they did that was because the ruling was that other companies can do baseball cards, but only Topps can do it with gum. They had to the other cards company had to come up with something else. So they came up with pieces with discussions with us, we came up with perhaps the product that will be the vehicle to carry all these cards in the package with, would be a puzzle. And then you would just get 4 pieces of the puzzle in the size of a card, and then you collect it and you have a whole puzzle of a famous Hall of Fame or whatever. So I said, beyond that, I used to remember when I was a kid, the first thing I would do in the spring was go to the candy store and get, the baseball cards at the time. And I remember these wonderful looking cards. They weren't photographs, but they were more heightened in some way. And it turns out they were art cards. In '53 and the Bowman cards, they were art cards. And then they stopped. After '53, there was no more of that because the rosters got so large and the collection of teams got so big that it was just too many players to be doing art cards. And they were really done very quickly. It was sometimes, I think I even heard that they actually painted over a black and white photo. But be that as it may, it was art. And I just said, is there a way, I know we can't do all the players, but there must be, Frank and I sat down, come up with this idea of coming up with how we can bring art back to baseball cards. And that was the birth of the Diamond Kings. What we would do is select one player from the 26 teams or whatever at the time that existed, who had a great year the year before, so that we painted it so if it's 1982, Steve Carlton had a wonderful, year, then in 1983 he would be featured as a Diamond King. And that was it was a great thing that happened for Don Rush. It put them on the map, so to speak. I never really got feedback from that, from any of the people that were out there, because they were kids at the time. It is only now that I keep getting emails and letters and cards to sign, and those things that I've done. Especially they did a card of me, I think, a couple of times. So that it's just great to look back and say that, because I did some crazy things with them. I got bored with just doing portraits, and I would do extra colorful things with them and what have you. And apparently these kids gravitated to that. And now they're letting me know that they've always been admirers of those cards. So that's how we got, and I did that for like 16 years, I think, 1980 to 96, or 1982 to 90, something like that. So that's how that came about. Bill Madden was really the credit. I've always credited him for that, for suggesting us, because the Diamond Kings have been a big boom to my career. I mean, a lot of people know me for that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I've always admired about you, Dick, is it sounds to you almost as a surprise when people come and, ask you about your work and wanting to have your work and everything else. You see, it's like, what, my work? You really want some of this? And I can't, I just don't think, you have an appreciation for how widely your work is respected and loved. And I know our association started, for me it was every bit as important as my association with some of the players I followed, because I followed your work as a kid. I remember in the Phillies yearbooks in the 1970s you started. Your artwork became synonymous with the Phillies, and I remember getting those posters, the Pride of the Phillies stuff that they'd have, and hanging them up, or tearing apart a yearbook and putting Perez, paintings or sketches on my wall. And I'll never forget, my parents were living in Wayne at the time, and you were using a framing place in Wayne, I think at the Gateway Shopping Center. And I went in and I saw this brilliant painting of Steve Carlton. In fact, I think it's one of your favorite paintings. It's just him, about to deliver a pitch, and you see a blue sky in back of him. And it's a marvelous painting. And I said, that's a Dick Perez painting. And I said, does he get his stuff framed here? And they said yes. And I said, he lives in this area. And I was just so ecstatic about that. So when we finally, got to know each other, I had all these questions and about the artistic process and how your career evolved and what your inspiration was for many of these paintings, because you really have become, at least in the Philadelphia area, synonymous with the Phillies. And I'm so happy that I know the Phillies, when they put up Citizens Bank Ballpark, they had an exhibit, or have an exhibit, titled Art at Home Plate, Philadelphia Baseball Legends on Canvas. And that consists of, I guess, 32 original paintings of yours, that is a permanent exhibit. And, what that exhibit is, it's a tribute to a century of Philadelphia baseball history, and the Hall of Fame members from the Phillies, the Athletics, as well as native sons who played for other teams. Any favorites of all those Phillies you've painted over the years? Because
as far as the Phillies, I think Mike Schmidt is probably he was a striking looking guy. In his figure, and without being over muscled, he had enough, and he had a great swing. He comes, I'm sure I have others that I also love to paint, but I would say him as a Philly would probably, and I think he's the one. Obviously, I would think it would be obvious that he's the one I painted the most from the Phillies. Maybe. Maybe Mickey Mantle. Everybody likes Mickey Mantle, so I paint a lot of those. But Certainly from the Phillies, he's the one that I most painted, and
now,
that would be my favorite.
One of the great admirers of your work, he's showed interest in it for some time, is Steve Carlton. I mean, he has always seemed to show interest in your paintings as well as your process. And you mentioned your name to him, and it always puts a smile on his face.
He was a good guy. I mean, he is a good guy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a thing that quite a revelation when you meet Ted Williams and you say, that guy's not a bad guy. I mean, he's a wonderful, charming guy. Of course, you knew him from what you read from the press, and the same thing with Steve Carlton. He was reticent. He didn't want to talk to writers. He had his own idiosyncrasies and so forth. He's a charming guy, a nice guy. Every signing I had with him, he's always been very cooperative and helpful. But I've never really, never made great friendships with players. I guess they just, number one, the living ones were from another era, and you can never really be their best. They have so many relationships, and they meet so many people. To give you an example, this deal with Steve Carlton, when Cal Ripken and Tony Gwynn were inducted, a friend of mine who handled them, who was their agent, did a big gala in Baltimore for them before the induction, and I was invited. I went up with a friend, and I go past this room, and the door was open in this big place they were having this affair. And in there was Steve Carlton and a bunch of Hall of Famers, and just privately in there. So I went to my friend who put on the event. I said, can you get me in that room? And he said, yeah, sure, I can get you in the room. So me and my friend and I, got us into that room, and I go to Steve, and he recognized me, and we started talking. Now I'm saying to myself, well, what do I talk to this guy about? So I said, do I talk about the Phillies? And so I say, I might have asked one Phillies question, and he didn't seem very interested in that. And then maybe about the state of baseball today, and he didn't seem very interested in that. So I figure, what else could I? And I say, he is a wine collector. So I say, how's your wine collection going? And that just opened it up. It was an hour in there with this guy. And not only that, but Johnny Bench, first it was, I think, Jim Palmer, Boog Powell, Eddie Murray, a couple of other guys. And Johnny Bench were all in a sort of like, they were the wine guys of the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Johnny Bench has I imagine he still has it, but a vineyard in California. He's a real wine guy. So I'm talking wine. I know nothing about wine, and I'm talking to him, and he's telling me all this stuff, and he says to the Johnny Bench, hey, a wine guy, and I'm not a wine guy. And it was the greatest conversation. It was a wonderful thing with all these guys, and I'm, okay. Fast forward, Larry Schenk is retiring from the Phillies, and they're having a big cookout for him. And I'm in line to get food, and behind me is Steve Carlton. And I said to him, because maybe 2 or 3 weeks before that was when I had this conversation, and I said, "Hi, Steve. Listen, I really enjoyed our conversation at the event and gala that they had for Ripken and Gwynn." And he looks at me and says, refresh my memory. He so many, right? How do you're not going to have close friends in that, it's just, you're competing against. I like to have, like you, and, I like to have friends that I can spend a lot of time with and have great conversations with. And he didn't remember. He knew who I was, but he didn't know, he had no clue about that whole thing. But anyway, that's I don't know what led me to that, but
I think you're right. I mean, I think a lot of these guys they move in their own small cliques or circles, and they really don't know who to trust or who to befriend. But there are some guys that you mentioned your name and your work brings a smile to your face, and it's not all about wine either. I mean, Monty Irvin, another great admirer of your work, and the tennis player. Now that's another thing people don't know about you. You were a real tennis guy at one time, and I guess you struck up somewhat of a friendship or an association with Monty Irvin.
Oh yeah. He was always great to me. He was, I really liked the old timers. Particularly, I liked when the Negro League started to really come into the Hall of Fame. They were also nice to be with and talk with. Judy Johnson, who was a local fellow, and my wife, just got into great conversations. But the old timers have always been, the ones that, and I'm talking about Yogi Berra and Phil Rizzuto. They were old timers. Stan Musial, what a great guy he is. And I met them because I would go up there, for induction ceremonies and everything else. But beyond that, it wasn't something that I got together. I had get-togethers with them. It was just wonderful to be around them. And when you talk about like humility and all that, one has to remember that an artist's life is very insecure. I mean, there's just no assurity that you are going to be successful in what you do. So I always remember that. And you mentioned earlier the exhibit that I had at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, the collection of which then became permanent in the Citizens Bank Park. When they were installing the exhibit, I was talking with the president of the Academy of Fine Arts, and he said to me, 73% of the people that graduate from this school are not doing art for a living. They have to do something else. They got to teach. They got to whatever. And it's a tough industry. And I get emails all the time and letters of how do I become a sports artist. Yeah. So it's got so many that I have a form letter that to tell them that it's the first thing I say is, you want to become an artist. You don't want to become a sports artist. That's just too limiting. Nobody comes to the galleries looking for sport art. I mean, in droves. You have to love to paint. You have to love to do art. Period. If you have a passion for a sport or something, then you incorporate that and make that a genre. But at first you got to be that. And the second thing is that it's just so much luck, to say the magic word, that is required to meet the right people at the right time. That really has been my experience. So I'm humble because of that, because I know how hard it is, to be a successful artist. It's very, very difficult to say, I'm going to be a sports artist, and you become a sports artist. It's hard. And I can tell by the letters that I get and by the emails that I get. There's people that are really good, people who need to improve. I can't give them the magic words that they're looking for. I just don't have them, unfortunately.
I think today's society, and what I tell my students all the time is, look, every field is glutted. So when you're in college, you have to go where your passion is. Mm-hmm. And, you study that, you do the best you can. If you can't make a living out of it, use it as an avocation. But follow your heart and follow your passion, and who knows what the future holds. I mean, you talk to most of these Major League Baseball players, they will say once you get to a certain level, everybody's talented.
That's right.
What separates, the people who really make it from those who don't are the breaks, the opportunities that they get, and just pure, honest luck.
Yeah, it's unfortunately that's the long and short of it. I can't, I think working hard, perfecting your skill, becoming really good at least gives you a shot, but you really got to work hard. I would be up to 3:00 in the morning trying to, to find ways to make better paintings. It was, and when I started some of my earlier paintings, I look back and I say, oh my God, did I really do that and sell it? I'm not going to say which, but it's a hard. The art, all the arts are that way. You're a writer. You know what that means. It's a real tough road to hoe. And like I say, that go ahead.
I have actually one more question for you, because I know listeners would be interested in this. You are currently involved with doing paintings of art cards for Topps baseball card company. I know you're also I guess getting back to landscape painting. What does the future hold for you, Dick?
Well, I'm not doing as many cards now. I mean, the Topps and my relationship is sort of have gone on a sabbatical, I think. They're not doing that many. I mean, they always look. One thing about companies like that is that they're looking for the next great idea, and it could be digital or it could be something else. It could, it's not necessarily a continuum of doing art cards. So, and I can understand that. I mean, it's not. I mean, I was I was part of the marketing team in the Phillies, and I understand that things have to change. But the future for me, I really would like to finish my update for the book, and then I might want to explore. I like drawing faces and people and all that, and there's a wealth of famous, wonderful people that have co-inhabited this world of ours that I want to make a collection of paintings of. I don't know how I'm going to use them or how I'm going to do them, but I'm talking about anybody from Paul Robeson to famous celebrities for that matter, who primarily people who have contributed to to our humanity. So I'm thinking of doing that because I like, and doing them not in a like I don't have to sell them, so I'll be free to do whatever I want to do with them in terms of technique and what have you, abstraction, what have you. So anyway, that's there ruminating, and maybe I'll get. I've done a number of landscapes, sold some, and what have you, and that's fine too. But I guess the short answer is I would like to get looser with my work, paint almost like a child again. That's basically my goal. Is I painted tightly, and I found myself getting tighter and tighter as I go along, and that's not a road I want to stay on. I want to be more expressive with my work, so I'll be striving for that in the next few years.
Well, I look forward to seeing your output, and thanks for joining us, Dick. I really appreciate the time that you gave me. Absolutely. And for listeners, check out Dick's artwork on dickperez.com. He works in a variety of media, gouache, acrylic, you name it, oils,
pencils, ink.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah,
everything. It's great stuff. It's great stuff. And thank you, Philly fans, for tuning in. See you next week for another podcast of Philadelphia baseball, past, present, personal. This is Bill Kashatus, rounding third and heading home on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.